right, everyone, get ready, because today we are diving into some really fascinating stuff. You mentioned being interested in alternative healing and spirituality, and you sent over this YouTube video about soul retrieval that I have to say has me totally intrigued. We're about to listen to a conversation between a spiritual teacher, Bishop Terrie Riley, and her community as they unpack this whole idea of getting back those lost parts of ourselves.
It's like getting a peek behind the curtain to see how these concepts actually play out in a real-world setting,
I know, right? It's definitely not your typical dry research paper. So picture this. A group of people gathered together, exploring this idea of soul retrieval with Bishop Riley as their guide. And get this, she even leads them through a meditation. Talk about an immersive experience.
It's amazing how technology allows these sorts of intimate explorations to reach such a wider audience these days.
Absolutely. So before we get too far, let's break down this whole concept of soul retrieval for anyone who might not be familiar with it. Have you ever stubbed your toe, like really badly, like so badly that you just wanted to detach from the pain for a second?
Oh, tell me about it.
Well, that's actually a brilliant analogy for what Bishop Riley is talking about.
It is, right.
Because she's saying that when we go through trauma, and that could be big T trauma or even little things, parts of us, our essence, our soul, can actually break off as a way to protect ourselves. It's like our inner defense mechanism kicking in.
Interesting.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Riley suggests that this might be why, as people get older, they can become a bit, how do I put this delicately, set in their ways.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. Like maybe they've lost so many of those soul fragments along the way that they're afraid to open themselves up to new experiences.
Makes you think about how much we all go through in a lifetime, doesn't it?
It really does.
All those little pieces of ourselves we might leave behind. Lost joy, flexibility, maybe even love.
Wow, yeah. When you put it like that, it really makes you stop and think. So how do we even begin to get those pieces back? Well, get this. The video talks about using a pendulum, kind of like a spiritual dowsing rod,
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They even have this whole protocol for it, developed by someone named Don Taylor, where you use the pendulum to ask yes or no questions about your soul fragments. Have you ever tried dowsing?
I haven't tried it myself, but I've always been curious about it.
Well, basically, the idea is that you're tapping into your intuition and using the pendulum as a way to get clearer answers from your higher self or your spirit guides or however you want to think about it. But here's where Riley takes it a step further. She says you can actually program your pendulum with their angels and guides. It's like having your own spiritual search engine.
Now, that's fascinating.
And I love this. She really stresses how important forgiveness is in this whole process.
Forgiveness.
Yes, forgiving yourself and forgiving others. It's a key to unlocking those lost parts of ourselves. It reminds me of the work of Dr. Brene Brown. You know her work.
I do, yes.
She's done a lot of research on shame and guilt and how those emotions can really hold us back from healing and living a wholehearted life.
It's so true.
And what I'm gathering from this video is that this soul retrieval method really tackles those feelings head on.
It acknowledges that trauma, and it leaves this residue, this imprint on our very being for better or worse. And sometimes the most effective path to healing isn't necessarily about reliving those past events, but it's more about dealing with the emotional and energetic traces they've left behind.
Exactly. It's like, how is that trauma still living in my body? And how can I start to release it?
Precisely.
And this is where the video gets really real, They start talking about applying these concepts to their own lives. And there's this one woman, Shirley, who shares a dream that just stopped me in my tracks when I heard it.
This is what's so fascinating to me about this kind of source material. We're not just talking theory here, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing how these ideas actually play out in real people's experiences.
Exactly. So Shirley describes this incredibly vivid dream where she's in a homeless shelter and she experiences sexual violation. And she talks about this really complex mix of emotions, shame, but also pleasure. And you can just tell, even just listening to her, that she's wrestling with some really heavy stuff.
It takes a lot of courage to share something so vulnerable, especially in a group setting like that. It really speaks to the level of trust and safety that Bishop Riley has cultivated within that community.
Absolutely. No, what I found really interesting was Riley's response. She doesn't try to analyze the dream, or offer any kind of instant interpretation like you might expect. Instead, she zeroes in on the feeling of shame itself and suggests that that's the energy that needs to be worked with directly.
That's such an important distinction. Instead of getting caught up in the why or the how of the dream, she's guiding Shirley to work with the emotional residue it's left behind.
Like, let's deal with the feeling that's here now in this moment, rather than getting lost in trying to unpack the past.
Exactly. And this connects to what they were discussing earlier about thought forms, these lingering patterns of energy that can keep us stuck,
Oh, right. Yeah.
Riley suggests that trauma can create these thought forms, and here's where it gets really wild. She even says that we can pick them up from other people.
Hold on. So it's not just our own stuff we're dealing with. We could be carrying around emotional baggage that isn't even ours originally.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
And it adds a whole new layer to the idea of soul retrieval, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's like, what if we're walking around with these fragments of energy that we've unconsciously absorbed from our families, our communities, even society at large?
Okay, now that is a total mind bender. It makes you wonder what we might discover if we could actually see these thought forms, right? But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I'm curious about how Riley actually helps them remove these negative thought forms. Does she offer any practical techniques in the video?
She does. It's actually pretty straightforward. Riley explains that during the soul retrieval process, you essentially ask your spiritual support team, those angels and guides we talked about earlier, to detach the negative charge from the thought form and release it.
It sounds almost too simple, but I can see how powerful it could be if it works. Like, just surrendering that burden and trusting a higher power to take care of it.
That's the key. Consciously choosing to let go of what's no longer serving you and creating space for something new to emerge.
Which brings us to the guided visualization Riley leads later in the video. This is where it feels like we're really stepping into another realm, you know?
Absolutely. And it's a beautiful example of how guided imagery can be used to access deeper levels of healing and transformation.
Okay, so walk me through it. What happens during the visualization?
Well, she starts by having them ground themselves, connect with their breath, really create that sense of safety and presence in the body.
That makes sense. You don't want to go diving into those deep emotional waters without a life vest, right?
Exactly. And once they're grounded, she guides them to visualize their soul space, which she describes as this vast, limitless expanse where those lost fragments of themselves are just waiting to be reclaimed.
Okay, I'm already getting chills just picturing it.
It's powerful stuff, and I love how she describes those fragments as glittering lights. It evokes this sense of inherent beauty and worth, even in the pieces we've lost or rejected.
Totally. It's like those parts of ourselves are never truly gone. They're just waiting to be remembered and reintegrated.
Exactly. And she uses these really evocative visuals throughout the visualization. For example, when she's guiding them to separate the positive feelings from a shame fragment, she describes it changing color, becoming this vibrant rainbow.
Whoa, that's amazing. It's like she's literally transforming the energy of shame into something beautiful and whole.
It's a powerful metaphor for the healing process itself. And then the way she describes the returning joy, love, and compassion, like flickering lights pouring back into their being, it's enough to bring tears to your eyes.
I bet. It's like reclaiming those lost parts of ourselves allows us to experience those positive emotions even more fully.
Precisely. And to bring it back to your earlier question about how it actually feels to do this work, remember Charlie, who shared that dream about shame?
Yeah.
He mentions that during the visualization, he saw a full rainbow radiating through him, a symbol of wholeness.
You're kidding. That's incredible. It's like all those pieces he'd been carrying around finally came together.
It's a beautiful testament to the power of the mind-body connection and how these practices can facilitate such profound experiences of healing and integration.
Wow, just wow. What really gets me about this whole concept of soul retrieval is that it's not just about feeling better, it's like you're becoming more you in the process.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about fixing or healing, but about reclaiming those lost parts of ourselves and stepping more fully into who we really are.
It makes you wonder who we'd be if we could gather up all those scattered fragments, right? And let's be real, that's probably a lifelong journey.
Absolutely. But that's where the real growth happens, don't you think? Each piece we reclaim brings us closer to wholeness, but it also opens up new doors, new possibilities we might not have even imagined before.
So it's not like you do the soul retrieval thing once and you're done. It's an ongoing evolution.
Exactly. And that's what I find so hopeful about it. Healing isn't a destination, but a process of continual discovery and growth.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's new to this whole soul retrieval idea, let's recap the key takeaways from our deep dives today. We started with this concept that trauma, whether it's big or small, can cause fragmentation.
Right, like we literally lose parts of ourselves as a way to cope with difficult experiences. But what's crucial is that those parts can be retrieved and brought back into the fold.
And we explored a few tools for doing that, like dowsing and visualization. And I loved how Bishop Riley emphasized the importance of forgiveness throughout the process.
Yes, forgiveness of self and others can be a major key to unlocking those lost parts of ourselves.
And we can't forget about the power of working directly with the feeling itself, rather than getting stuck in the story of what happened.
Because sometimes the feeling is the story, or at least the doorway to a deeper understanding of ourselves. It's about learning to listen to our bodies and our emotions, even when they're messy or uncomfortable.
This entire conversation has me reflecting on something. If those soul fragments broke off to protect us, could they also be carrying strength and wisdom we've forgotten along the way? Like, what if those painful experiences actually hold hidden gifts that we can reclaim?
Now that's a powerful question to sit with, and it really highlights how important it is to approach these unconventional ideas with an open mind.
Couldn't agree more. Big thanks to you for diving into this topic with me. It's been truly illuminating. And a huge thank you to you, dear listener, for sending us this incredible video. We hope this deep dive has sparked some new insights and maybe even inspired you to explore these concepts further.
If you're feeling called to learn more, I highly recommend checking out Dr. Brené Brown's work on shame and vulnerability. It's a beautiful complement to everything we've talked about today.
And hey, maybe you could even give dowsing a try yourself. You never know what hidden wisdom you might uncover within. Until next time, keep exploring, keep those deep dive requests coming, and we'll catch you on our next adventure in discovery.